At every level of society today, politics, religion, race, age, gender, sexuality, class, we are met with division and distrust. We live in a society governed by something I call an ethic of domination. Since the first European stepped foot on this hemisphere, through the genocide of the native peoples, the enslavement of Africans, extinction of the animals, decimation of the forests, destruction of the atmosphere, in calling it progress. That ethic pervades every level of society, from the highest level of government and business to our entertainment and even our family life. On the news this week, people were frantically looking for a motive for last week's shooting in Las Vegas. Look no further. It's in this all-encompassing ethic of domination. The man felt he had the right to do what he did. We don't need to call it mental illness. We don't need to put another name on it. The man felt he had the right to do what he did. It's the ethic of domination. Anything else? Well, that's just, that's just excuses. And, he felt he had the right to do it. And all the politicians and the pundits, they're looking for some specific reason to point to, one consistent with their particular perspective. And very few are willing to step back and see our country's obsession with violence for what it is. Domination is the foundation of our society. And it was based largely on a theology, or theologies and philosophies of domination that are nearly as old as civilization. And it's not the fault of a particular religion, race, gender, or class. Whether we were born into a dominator class of people or a dominated class, none of us chose it. Born into it. When the Nazis, the Klan, and a collection of other groups that fully embody the dominator ethic, when they gathered in Charlottesville, Virginia, a few months ago, fully armed and prepared for violent action, they met absolutely no legal constraints. According to several sources, even though they broke several provisions of their permit, the police made no real effort to shut them down. The torch-lit procession that preceded the planned rally, the permitted rally. It was not permitted and clearly indicated violent intent, with chants like, "You will not replace us," and "blood and soil," which have clear ties to Nazi Germany. I don't want to dwell on the events of that weekend. There was no shortage of coverage on the news, social media, it's still out there. But I do want to make the point that this was no mere rally, as the news like to call it. Zenobia Jeffries points out in her article in Yes Magazine, who wears paramilitary gear, carries automatic weapons to a rally? Who takes shields and helmets and pepper spray and bats and sticks to a rally? The car didn't crash. It was driving at full speed into a crowd of counter-protesters. She points out what happened in Charlottesville was white nationalist extremists inciting a riot. Period. But was that how it was presented on the news? Is that how our politicians presented it? Instead, the media has made a big deal about the Antifa, right? The anti-fascists. At times making them out to be the moral equivalent to the alt-right by calling them the alt-left, missing the point that the anti-fascists don't hold rallies. They don't march in an attempt to intimidate innocent bystanders. They exist to serve as a counter to the alt-right. Now, I don't necessarily condone their tactics, but many of the peaceful protesters in Charlottesville credit the Antifa for saving them from the clear and present danger of the alt-right. And in her account of the events of the day, Brandy Daniels, who's a postdoc fellow at University of Virginia, she said, "On Democracy Now!, Cornel West, who was also in the line with us, said that he felt the Antifa saved his life. And she says, I didn't roll my eyes at that statement or see it as an exaggeration. I saw it as a very reasonable hypothesis based on the facts we had." The Reverend Seth Wispelway said he believed the death toll would have been significantly higher had the Antifa not been present, making the point, they have their tools and they are not one I will personally use, but our purposes were the same: block this violent tide. The media thrives on us versus them narrative. Left versus right, alt-left versus alt-right, Democrat versus Republican, white versus black, etc. As though there was these moral equivalents and they balanced each other out, instead of one being clearly different than the other. And it's critical that we do not accept this narrative. The truth of the matter is, this is not 1930s era Germany, and there is a real and serious opposition to the emboldened right-wing extremists. While it's true we cannot ignore this threat, let us not pretend it is more than it is. In Boston, the so-called free speech rally, a week following Charlottesville, tens of thousands of counter-protesters took to the streets to drown out the rally, which, according to an article in the Washington Post, by 1 p.m., the handful of rally attendees had left the Boston Common Pavilion, concluding the event without planned speeches. This is where we need to focus. Yes, certain groups have been emboldened by a president that seems to support their cause, but it is becoming abundantly clear that the people of this country just will not tolerate this intolerance. The truth of the matter is this: we are all lost. We are all lost. We're in here with a bunch of like-minded people. We're part of the problem. Sorry to say. We're part of the problem. Because we gather in groups of people to be who are like us, who think like us, who act like us, who look like us. That's part of the problem. We are all trying to make sense of the society. And a society that is very efficient at meeting our physical needs. More efficient than any other society in the history of the world at meeting the physical needs of its citizens. But it has long ago ceased to meet our deeper psycho-spiritual needs of belonging, meaning, and purpose. And that's why we gather in these groups. As Thomas Merton points out, we never see the one truth, though, that would help us begin to solve our ethical and political problems. That we are all more or less wrong. That we are all at fault, all limited and obstructed by our mixed motives, our self-deception, our greed, our self-righteousness, and our tendency to aggression and hypocrisy. This is just as true for each of us as it is for those young men caught up in the delusion of their white supremacy. So what do we do about it? That's the big question, right? What do we do? Well, this past year I started driving for Uber and Lyft. And right off the bat, I must say that it is not anything what I expected. Before I started, I imagined I would be driving tourists around town to the beach, etc., around St. Augustine, making small talk, where are you from, blah, blah, blah. No. Well, that's part of what I do, for sure. But for the times that I choose to drive, I have found that the tourists are the smallest part of my business. The reality of driving Uber is that most of the people that get into my car are struggling in one way or another to make ends meet. Many are going to their minimum wage jobs, going to restaurants, fast food places. One young man told me straight out, I just got out of jail. And he said, thank you for picking him up. My passengers are black and white, Hispanic. They're both rich and poor, some with too much on their minds to even dabble in small talk. Others so desperate for human connection, I might think they only called Uber for the opportunity to talk to another person. My passengers shop at Walmart, the outlet malls, and the most expensive stores in downtown St. Augustine. Some of my passengers are clearly grateful for the ride. Others seem almost embarrassed to be driving in my little Ford Focus. Now, except for one couple that I called the Bickersons, who were clearly under the influence of one or more substances, I try to treat all my passengers with the same care and respect due them. And as for the Bickersons, I felt it necessary to respectfully ask them to leave my car. And that was out of care and respect for myself. I didn't feel physically endangered, but energetically, I just could not drive with them. Now, generally speaking, I do not get into details about my other job, this job. In large part because, in my experience, people tend to make assumptions about me once they find out I'm a minister. Now, I don't lie, but I'm not always forthcoming. Minister is not my identity. It is my job. And the flip side of that coin is the assumption people make about me when I'm driving for Uber. And I try to keep this in mind when I pick someone up. Because just as I am not defined by this job or that job, neither is anybody else. I'm not defined by the car I drive, my age, the color of my skin, and neither is anybody else. We are defined by the choices we make, especially the countless little choices we make every single day. Virtue, Aristotle pointed out, is not the reason we do the right thing. It is what we have when we make a habit of doing the right thing. Now, here's the thing I realized driving around St. Augustine, picking up strangers and dropping them off, very often in isolation, sometimes in the dark. I realized that the vast majority of people, the vast majority of people are decent, virtuous people who do the right thing the vast majority of the time. But all we hear about are those exceptions to the rule. We don't hear about the responsible gun owners. We only hear about the irresponsible, violent gun owners, right? We don't hear about all the people doing good in their neighborhoods. We hear about those organizing for violence and hate. While the vast majority of people decent people trying to figure this out the same way we are. They may not have the same conclusions, the same methods, but they are just like us. Now imagine if we actually believe what they tell us about Muslims. Imagine if Islam was truly a religion that preached hatred and violence. Imagine 1.5 billion terrorists out there. It's ridiculous, right, to even consider. When I'm driving Uber, there is no segregation by race or income or religion. It's helped me break down the bubble that I have lived in for some time. The bubble, the largely segregated bubble of Unitarian Universalism. We didn't explicitly choose to be segregated, but here we are. And we're segregated in many different ways. Not just by color, not just by education levels, by cultural preferences, by religious beliefs or disbeliefs. There's all of these things work together. But we can't beat ourselves up over this fact. There's no good to just wring our hands in concern. Well, what do we do? What do we do? How do we change things? And then come back next week and do the exact same thing we've always done. The other choice is to begin doing something different that will result in a new outcome going forward. Because virtue, excellence, is the habit of doing the right thing. But what are those choices? What is the right thing? How do we create a religion that potentially speaks to any one of those people that get into my car? That's my concern. I want to be able to invite anybody that gets into my car to a Unitarian Universalist service. But right now I don't feel comfortable doing that. For many reasons. How do we hope to make such a monumental shift? A religion that not only rejects the ethic of domination that is the legacy of our history, but offers a real and significant alternative. Now, author Sharon Welch, in her book, A Feminist Ethic of Risk, which was required reading on my path to ministry, but has for too long been stuck on a shelf unheeded. Welch writes, as we resist the evil of racism, seeing its connection with other forms of structural oppression, we need to learn that failure to develop the strength to remain angry in order to continually love and therefore resist is to die. The death we face is not as immediate as faced by many African Americans. The Euro-American who gives up the struggle against war or against racism does not face physical death, but the death that is experienced by those who turn from rage, who forego resistance, is nonetheless real. It is the death of the imagination, the death of caring, the death of the ability to love. And her solution, it is what she calls an ethic of risk, which is characterized by 3 elements, each of which is essential. A redefinition of responsible action, grounding in community, and strategic risk-taking. Strategic risk-taking. She notes that responsible action does not mean the certain achievement of desired ends, but the creation of a matrix in which further actions are possible. The creation of the conditions of possibility for for desired changes. Thus, it is an ethic of risk. A fancy term, I think, for faith. But we can call it an ethic of risk. Now, one of the reasons that most of us, myself included, have such a hard time explaining Unitarian Universalism to people outside our walls is because we don't explicitly stand for anything. We have a nice set of principles, but they are purposely vague and vague enough to not trigger concern for those uncomfortable with explicitly religious language, and so not explicit enough to draw people who are in search, who are looking. No, not just that. They're in dire need of explicit meaning and purpose in their lives. And we offer them these vague principles, which nobody can really argue with. Now, I envision a spiritual movement that embodies our Unitarian Universalist principles and values and strongly encourages its members to do the same. I imagine a movement that doesn't merely imply or encourage an active resistance to violence and hatred, but makes it a way of life. A movement that actively works to create that matrix from which a better future can be formed. A fully integrated community, inclusive of all differences that follow an ethic of domination, that all differences that those that follow that ethic of domination exploit to their advantage. A movement not afraid to make demands of its members. A movement that holds itself and all its members accountable to its central tenets. I'm going to repeat that one. A movement not afraid to make demands of its members. A movement that holds itself and all its members accountable to its central tenets. An ethic of domination tells us we must know what this movement will look like, how it will be structured, what will be those tenets before we can begin to form it. Because domination says you have all the answers going in. But an ethic of risk invites us to move in the direction of our dreams, developing the matrix of success as we go. Learning from our failures, growing from our mistakes. Is this not how the universe itself came into being? Is this not how life emerged on this planet? Is this not how evolution itself works? Every step of the way, the universe created the conditions out of which the next step emerged. There are no master plans, no guarantees of success, merely a matrix of possibility, that which is the source of imagination and love, that which is called divinity, the mystery, goddess, and God. If it's not that way, then we're wrong. Grossly wrong. If there's a master plan out there, and there was no risk along the way of failure, then we totally missed the boat. Science is a joke. Everything we do is a misstep. And life has no meaning. Most of us are familiar with this now famous quote by Martin Niemöller. He said, "First they came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't communist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews. I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. As long as we hold out these distinctions, well, I'm a Unitarian Universalist. I'm Christian. Those are Christians. Those are Jews. Those are Muslims. They're conservative. I'm liberal. Us versus them. As long as we accept this narrative that allows the ethic of domination to divide us, it has the potential to tear us down. So let us instead build a movement that does not deny our differences, but celebrates them, while upholding the great truth of interdependence, of divine unity, the matrix of creation. Let's build a movement that is as welcoming as Uber, providing a space that helps all of us reach our destination. Wow. And whether you're going to heaven, and you call it that, that's fine. It's just a word. It's just a metaphor. Are we afraid of metaphors? When we can build a movement like this, when we can really set the example, we can create something new in our communities and in the world. So that when they come for any one of us, they come for all of us. And if our goal is greater diversity, then it's up to us to make the move, that first move. It's up to us to create the conditions in which that diversity will thrive. And that begins by those of us who are here to be honest with each other and ourselves about what we are willing to give up in order to reach that goal we claim to have. Because we cannot grow in diversity if we aren't willing to be uncomfortable. To make it not about us and what we want each Sunday and what makes us feel good. We have to be comfortable with that discomfort. In doing so, we can create a truly diverse community. An example for the world that it is possible. An example of an ethic of risk over an ethic of domination. If we're not showing a better way every single day, then what's our purpose? Other than our own pleasure in coming together and being with people like us. But at the same time, enjoy being together. Push each other's buttons a little bit. Get outside your comfort zone with each other. Maybe that's a starting point. Instead of lectures about what science is learning, groups that explore the depths of each and every psyche here. What drives us? Little things, one step at a time. And that ball is in your court. So be it. Amen. Blessed.